Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to just give you a few moments about our experience of Brexit before outlining the vision for independent sovereign nations on our continent. We joined the European Economic Community in 1972, and the vast majority of British people at that time thought they were joining a trading club, a trading association designed to facilitate the free movement of goods and services. But over the last 48 years, there has been increasing federalization, impinging on our sovereignty and our democratic process. And the British people themselves have voted for UKIP, which is a party born in trying to take the United Kingdom out of the European Union in the last 3 or 4 European parliamentary elections. In fact, they won the European parliamentary elections, and then their successor party, the Brexit Party, won the last European parliamentary elections. So what could we do as politicians when British citizens are leaving the mainstream parties like my party or the Labour Party and others and heading towards backing the UK Independence Party? Well, we can either ignore them, as some politicians do, or we can act. And so what we decided to do first and foremost is not to pull out of the European Union. And I tell you this because I want you to know just how hard we have worked to try to avoid Brexit and the compromises that we've had to make and were prepared to make in order to prevent this moment from happening. First of all, we pulled out of the EPP-ED group, which is a caucus for right-of-centre parties in the European Parliament. We didn't think that they were Eurosceptic enough, and many of them, such as the CDU in Germany, actually believe in the supranational state. So we pulled out of the EPP-ED group, much to Angela Merkel's consternation, and she expressed her real disappointment and anger with our former Prime Minister, David Cameron, when we pulled out of this caucus. And we worked with the Poles and the Czechs and the Hungarians to try to set up a new caucus in the European Parliament for non-federalist conservative parties. And naively, we thought that we Britons, in conjunction with the Poles and the Czechs and the Hungarians, could take on the Franco-German axis, which has controlled the planning and destiny of this project. We failed. We couldn't stop that juggernaut moving towards the creation of a supranational state. And so, of course, having failed in that regard, our Prime Minister tried to renegotiate with the European Union. Renegotiate not on things which we had thought up of ourselves as politicians, but what the British electorate was telling us. They weren't happy with our court's decisions being overturned. They were increasingly frustrated and concerned about our inability to control our own borders, and a whole plethora of issues which they instructed our Prime Minister to try to negotiate with the European Union. Now, according to the House of Commons Library, we've handed approximately £570 billion of taxpayers' money to the European Union since we joined. I can take you to schools in my constituency with leaking roofs, poor insulation, where they're making cutbacks, not enough teaching assistants. I can take you to my local Royal Shrewsbury Hospital, where people are still on trolleys in corridors at winter times because there are not enough beds for them. And yet we've been handing over £250 million net to this organisation since we joined. So we were hoping that they would listen to us, having transferred all of this money across to them over the last 4 decades. Of course, nothing happened, and Mr. Cameron came back empty-handed. The agreement he's signed with the European Union wasn't worth the paper it was written on, it was meaningless, and it didn't address any of the problems that our constituents were talking about the direction of travel of the European Union. In fact, the European Union's ideological zealotry, it trumps everything. Its ideological zest trumps practical issues to do with solidarity, economics, business, mutual commerce. It is so determined to create a supranational state, not challenged by anybody or anything, that its intransigence towards us and its indifference to our genuine concerns means that they have now lost one of the largest contributors to the budget, because as you all know, we've been paying 20% of the budget over the last few years. So we had the referendum, and I campaigned. I think my attitude to the European Union was one of ambivalence, but when we were treated so appallingly by the European Union with such indifference and contempt, many of us moderates were tipped into the Brexit camp after those negotiations, and I campaigned for it in my constituency, and my constituency voted for Brexit simply because I didn't think I could sell it to my electorate. They had been sending a very strong message over the last few years that they weren't happy with what was going on. The renegotiation did not meet their expectations, and simply from a sales perspective, I didn't think I could sell the new negotiated agreement to my electorate. So, and what I want to say is how joyous I am that for the first time on our continent, the people have made a decision and it's being implemented. That's a completely new concept. Every time the people of any European country have had the temerity to take on the European Union, to take on these elites in Brussels, be they in Denmark, Holland, France, or Ireland, they've been told, you've made a mistake. Vote again until you get it right. Well, they picked a fight with the wrong people this time, and we have implemented what the British people voted for. I believe that Brexit will be very positive for my country, economically and politically, but also from a transparency perspective and accountability. I say to my constituents in Shrewsbury, we have a constituency, think about it, you've got a parliament representing 500 or 600 million people. Think how big the constituencies have to be. In our case, it's called the West Midlands. 6 million people, 3 times the size of Lithuania. None of the MEPs live in my community of Shropshire, none of them have offices there, none of them come there, and they work in another country. How is that making them accountable? At least they're elected, unlike the EU Commission. As a politician in Britain, I go back to my constituency every Friday. I have an office there, but people can get at you, they can hold you to account, not just in your office. They stop you in the supermarket, they stop you in the swimming pool, they stop you in the park. They recognize me being 6'9", as a giant. I can't get away. And they can make your life difficult, and they can hold you to account. And I'm so passionate that we are getting back to a system whereby our House of Commons, the buck stops there, we make the rules, we make the regulations, and if the people don't like it, they can throw us out. And I will end by saying this. As the first ever Polish-born British Member of Parliament, we will take any Polish government to court if they try to ditch the Polish currency without a referendum. There isn't a single group of people in any European country who have voluntarily, through a referendum, chosen to give up their currency. And if you give up your currency, and I address this to the 8 countries remaining that still don't have the Eurozone, but all of you are contractually obliged so to do, apart from Denmark, Denmark being the only country with an opt-out, if you ditch your currency, ladies and gentlemen, it's going to be much more difficult for future generations to make the decision that we have done. Protect your currency. Thank you.